Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another evening here in Australia, discussing great whiskey in the virtual world. My name is Scott Fitzsimons, and I am here in the bowels of the Oak Barrel here in Sydney, quite obviously locked down, but I do have some great whiskey to get me through, and I do have some great friends as well joining me on the live stream tonight as we go through whiskey from four, can you call them corners? Yeah, probably four corners, four peers of the world in this beautiful boutique pack. But before we jump in and talk whiskey, I'd like to say a quick g'day to Simon McGoran live from the Northern Beaches, equally locked down, and Dave Worthington in 30-degree heat in bright and sunny in freedom in England, which is a sentence I haven't said very many times in my life.
Yeah, we were released back out into the wild yesterday. Launched as Freedom Day or something like that. Well, I didn't leave the house again, but we've just released all lockdowns here in England anyway, not in Scotland and Wales. There are certain rules around different parts of the nation, but we're celebrating a glorious summer. I'm absolutely loving these sort of 29, 30 degrees. It works for me, and I'm not going to complain because before you know it, it'll be cold, wet and grey again.
Yeah, well, I can
good morning. Good morning from brightest blue, deepest mid-Bedfordshire.
Yeah, I can see on my taskbar on my computer here, it says 14 degrees, mostly cloudy. So I'm doing my best to just send that back to you and swap these two over.
It's perfect whiskey drinking weather, Scott. That's all you can think about.
Absolutely. Simon, how are you, mate?
I'm very good. Yes, up here on the Central Coast, locked down as well, but very keen to tuck into some delicious whiskies this evening. I've actually not tried most of the whiskies we're trying tonight, except for number 3, which we'll get into in a bit. But very excited to try these.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. These are going to be first impressions from me tonight. So we are going around the world, so to speak. There's a couple of countries here that we understand as established whiskey producers, but then a couple that we are sort of on the emerging side. With Ireland and America, and then Germany and England. But Dave, how do these packs come around, and how do you choose what goes into a world whiskey pack?
At the time, I guess we'd stock what we had. I think this is before we started putting these themed series together. And we had a bit of stock, and we thought lots of people were asking about these gift sets, or to us to put some gift sets. They wanted 5 CLs rather than 3 CLs, drinks by the dram. So that's where it all came from. They wanted to see the label on a miniature as well. And trying to squeeze our colourful labels, our stories onto these smaller drams was a bit of a challenge. But we picked these. I just picked the new Scotch collection, actually. This yesterday I was picking another set of whiskies for the Scotch collections, because we do 3 collections, a Scotch, a premium Scotch and the world. And these will always be changing as and when we get new stocks and put these through. So this is our, we started bottling world whiskies way back in 2014, just 2 years after we started bottling whiskey independently, because it wasn't just all about Scotch. We recognized that the world was making some great world whiskies. So this is a neat little collection put together into a very neatly little package box. I think we can start our journey in Ireland, where whiskey is said to have originated. It's an award-winning 80-year-old single malt from an undisclosed distillery, and it was awarded a gold at the Irish Whiskey Masters. Then we'll head over to the USA for our second with a 9-year-old American whiskey from the Heaven Hill Distillery in Kentucky. And then we'll come back across the pond and deep into the Bavarian countryside for an award-winning German 3-year-old single malt. Again, this is another gold medal winner. It was awarded gold at the World Whiskey Masters. And it's a pretty powerful whiskey for just 3 years old. And we'll finish up in good old Blighty with yet another world award-winning whiskey. It's another gold medal at the World Whiskey Masters. It's an 8-year-old English whiskey from the English Whiskey Company, the first English whiskey distillery in England for over 100 years. So no travel involved, no passports required, just like me back in Australia again with my 0 air miles. I mean, I should be allowed to fly the plane now, the amount of times I've come down to Australia over these lockdowns.
That's going to be you're going to walk into the the terminal next time out and be like, well, where's my free upgrade? I've got that many frequent flyer points.
Yeah, it doesn't happen on a Zoom or a Restream or it doesn't happen like that, does it?
So we launched these sets at I suppose quite a fortuitous time in some ways. These would have taken you around the world with tastings you've done with these sets. If you've done tastings of these, obviously apart from in Australia, where else have you done some interesting tastings?
I've done these in US, Canada, and I've done them in the UK over the last 15, 18 months. Yeah.
You're great.
Yeah, and I've done them live with the whiskies all over the place. Yeah, I put the Slyrs into blind tastings and blown people away. Rip the labels off and sneak them in blind, and people, what, a 3-year-old? No way. From Bavaria? You're kidding me? Absolutely.
All right. Well, as you say, mate, it is whiskey drinking time, so I'm going to pour a bit of this Irish, I reckon.
Yeah, get some of that 8-year-old Irish into the glass. Anyone playing the sweepstake, it is 10 o'clock, 8 minutes past 10 in the morning. I'm just going for the first nose.
Brilliant.
And a wee sip. Oh, my palate's good today. Oh.
Good, yeah. Well, as opposed to last week, I've only tried one of these, the Slyrs. So these are all going to be first impressions. And I'm yet to have an Irish whiskey from Boutique that I haven't liked, so I'm looking forward to this.
Well, this is an 8-year-old Irish single malt from an undisclosed Irish distillery. It's our second batch, so if you ever saw the first batch of this label, you know exactly what distillery it came from because we named it on batch 1. It was a 17-year-old. This was a release of just 876 bottles, and we bottled this at 45.7% ABV. I mentioned earlier it's one of our award-winning whiskies being awarded gold at the Irish Whisky Masters, a competition that's run by the Spirits Business magazine. Now, if you know your Irish whiskey history, then you should be able to close down on the distilleries that this could have come from. You also, if you'd seen label number 1, you will know exactly what distillery it come from. I'll tell you a little bit later, why not? It is a single malt, so that rules out Ireland's largest distillery, the Middleton Distillery, where your Jamesons comes from, your Jamesons, and your Powers and your Redbreast and all the other things, because they don't make single malt commercially. Now, when Irish Distillers was left with just the 2 distilleries, Bushmills up in the north and Middleton down in the south, there was this agreement that the malt whiskies would come from Bushmills, and the grain and the pot still whiskey would come from Middleton, and that's how all Irish brands have evolved since the 70s. Right? Jameson's, the French really saved Irish whiskey industry by buying Irish distillers and persuading them to let's do blended whiskey, because otherwise it just wouldn't have survived. So Irish whiskey was, maintained its supremacy for such a long time around the world, only yielding to Scotland at the end of the 19th century. Ireland's whiskey dominance started to slip towards the end of that 19th century, the coffee still being one of those initial factors in that decline. But there's an old book, it's probably the first ever whiskey bloggers, a really angry piece by the Irish distillers, by the Jameson brothers, about what is whiskey. It really was an angry piece about blended whiskies, and pot still was the only true whiskey. I think that's one of the initial nails in their coffin as well. The Anglo-Irish War of Independence was obviously the next nail in the coffin, which promptly followed by Prohibition in the States. That combination of Great Britain cutting off its biggest customer base. So when Ireland broke away in their War of Independence, the British government said, well, you can't have access to any of our Commonwealth markets, and Canada was, I think, their biggest market at that time, and we just closed it. Obviously Australia as well being one of the markets, and then Prohibition, which was their second biggest market in the States, so wiped out the Australian the Irish whiskey industry pretty quickly. By the 1970s there was just those 2 distilleries left, and that was until 87 when a new independent distillery was founded, John Teeling, He must be considered as one of the founding fathers of the rebirth of Irish whiskey industry when he opened that Cooley distillery. Certainly he's been recognised in the Irish Whiskey Hall of Fame, where he turned this old potato alcohol factory, or vegetable alcohol factory, and turned it into a whiskey distillery. It's quite oily, this, isn't it? Oh, I always found this quite oily, really oily spirit. So that Cooley distillery makes both grain and single malt whiskey, but unlike its northern Irish neighbour, it only double distills its malt, much like most of Scotland. Let's get that label up.
At risk of cop out, I can see that it's a single malt. I can see that it's Irish. It smells Irish, and there is a smell to these Irish single malts as well. I think that you can sort of pull out, and if it is from a certain distillery that I think it might be, it's very much of that style. That freshness and that grassiness is there, but as you say, Dave, that there's that weight and oiliness to it as well.
Yeah, it always reminds me of that really light sewing machine oil on the nose. I first get that little oiliness that comes through. I really love it. It's that Singer sewing machine oil. I seem to remember from my childhood and the old Singer sewing machine, and
I always love getting that sort of fresh green apple note I always tend to get with Irish malts.
There's the triple distilled gets a lot of those really high end tropical fruits, whereas a double distilled seems to get those orchard sort of fruits coming through. But you can see on our label we've got a spirit safe. We've got one of those impossible tridents put in there. We got 2 into 3, 3 into 2, whatever way you want to go.
It's very.
If you looked at our batch 1 label, it was clearly identified as a Cooley. So this is a Cooley. We're just not allowed to put it on the label this time for some reason. So we haven't, but we just used the same label. So this was from the Teeling's distillery at the time, the Cooley. They don't own it now. They sold out to Brown Forman, didn't they, a little while ago?
Morris Beam Suntory. I was going to say Morrison, but also the next one.
The other way. Yes, you're right. It's the other one. So that's our label on this Irish. It's different from the other single malt Irish whiskies that we've had. We've got that play into that impossible trident there. Tasting notes for this one. I think these are the original tasting notes here that I've got. Big grassy, big grass. I'm just going to turn my fan off because I can see it making lots of noise.
Here we go, green apple. Yeah, I was going to say French toast, sort of with powdered sugar on top.
Yeah, you got buttered toast on the palate. I really love this little Irish whiskey. I'm not sure. I think there may be a few bottles of this in the UK. No, I think it's. I couldn't find any the other day. I was looking for some myself. I've only got a wee sample bottle of it.
I love these little gems of Irish whiskies. I'm a Fitzsimons. I'm a bastard son of Simon, so I do have that Irish blood that way. But I'm also a quarter Scottish, so I don't have a dog in this fight. But I do love, this concept of people look at Irish whiskey now and they go, that's the lighter of the two. But you go back 150 years and Irish whiskey is the heavier. And I love these sorts of Irish whiskies that introduce this very oily, and like there's so much barley on this. There's real cereal notes amongst that oiliness to the end. I love discovering these sort of Irish whiskies. Quick g'day as well to those dudes who are watching with us. Alexandra Darlenberg tuning in. Jimmy Finnegan was there before. I can see James and Whiskey is my jam. And Dave, I'm going to let you pronounce Brendan's name here.
Me neither. Brendan, yes. Definitely Brendan.
Yeah, that's as far as I got. Fitzsimon's a little bit easier than that, but I think it's probably you were talking about the John and the Teeling family. I don't think it's any overstatement to say that it's the most exciting time in Irish whiskey for 150 years. It's been so battered around, and so consolidated that these sorts of whiskies didn't exist 30 and 40 years ago.
No, that wasn't that long ago when you think about it.
No,
it really wasn't. Everything was triple.
It's going to get harder as well for your cryptic clues as more and more Irish malts come online. You can't say, well, there's only these couple of distilleries to choose from. What are we at with that last count, David? So over 30, 35?
It's well over 30. Yeah, I must admit, I haven't done a proper count up recently. There's lots of independent bottlers in Ireland that haven't got distilleries, so they're bottling Bushmills and Teeling stocks, and obviously the new distillery that John Teeling has put together since, or an industrial distillery that was supplying malts and grains, both double and triple distilled, pot stilled. It's a utility distillery, a Great Northern distillery, I think it is online, and it's been around for a little while now, and it's actually supplying whiskies to a lot of these little independents. So it's like a big American distillery supplying all these with brands basically, and can make lots of different styles of whiskey to supply Irish brands. But there is a lot of small craft Irish distilleries coming up, and there's a lot of interest in what's going on over there. I'm particularly excited. There's a few distilleries that I've been keeping my eye on that I'd love to be able to get some boutique, so very, very small distilleries, very, very small batches of these whiskies, and just to have a cask or two. Blackwater Distillery is one of those ones that I'm looking at, because I know they've been doing some green malt, which is something I'd really want to get my hands on, some more green malt. I had some from the States, and I'd love to get some from Ireland as well. It's one of the old traditional, making whiskey with actually kilning the malt. So you don't actually dry the malt, you just malt it and then smash it and make your wash from it. A real bastard to do, apparently.
We're hearing about a lot of this stuff happening, but we're not necessarily seeing it come through yet in Australia. But we are seeing a little bit of the Drumshanbo stocks, which is from the Shed Distillery, once a year. But we are seeing it. That's really interesting, because it's pot still with a bit of that green malt, but they're using a local oat as well, which gives it this weird creaminess, which I think is really interesting. But incredibly exciting time, and as I say, great to try. These sorts of whiskies that have a bit of age on them, that have already been, to sort of open up the minds that we, even if these did exist 10 years ago, we weren't drinking them in Australia. They were going into blends, they were being blended away. They were appearing in brands that we didn't see here. I think this sort of stuff will help knock down the walls to get Irish whiskey back to where it needs to be.
So what I've got, the information on this one was a vatting of refill bourbon and refill sherry casks. So that's what this one says it was. It was available over here. I'm not sure if it still is. I'm going to have a recheck of that a little bit later. But yeah, we had this as a recommended retail price for £53 over here.
Not too bad.
And please don't ask me where you can buy this afterwards, because you can't.
Yeah. Sadly, I think most of these have sold out, and I'm looking for a bottle of the English.
Yeah, we do have more Irish whiskey.
Yes.
And we've got hopefully got some exciting stuff on the way soon we can tell you about. So yeah.
So we're getting on a plane. What I gather is quite a well-travelled plane or even boat trip from Ireland to America. Yeah,
well, it's a story. It's a story of whiskey, isn't it? I think. Yeah. And if you want to fly to the States from the UK, it's best to go through Ireland and go through security and immigration in Ireland. I know quite a few people will do it that way and hop across into Ireland, and then go through American customs and immigration in Ireland, and then fly straight over to the States and just walk off the plane straight into the US. It seems to be a much easier way of doing it. So yes, we're off to America. We're off to Heaven Hill. This is our first ever batch of American whiskey from the Heaven Hill. We've bottled some bourbon and we've bottled some corn whiskey in the past. They're all American whiskies, but this is the first American whiskey, labeled American whiskey. That's confusing, perhaps, maybe. Well, let me explain. So this is a 9-year-old. It was a release of just 1,177 bottles, and we bottled this one at 48.4% ABV. Now, if you look back at American whiskey history, it all really starts post-Prohibition. Everything before Prohibition was more or less lost. Really, there was so much destroyed. Stills, small stills scrapped, sent to other parts of the world, and so many distilleries died. But the Heaven Hill Distillery was founded in 1935. Now, Prohibition ended in 1933, and it sparked this new interest in Kentucky bourbon. In Bardstown, the founder, Ed Shapiro, and his brothers agreed to invest in a new distillery and eventually bought it outright. They had no inventory, no warehousing, and no branding. Their distillery has been family owned and operated ever since, and today the distillery is known for many, many brands. Now, unlike Scotch whiskies, where every distillery has its own sort of brands, American distilleries seem to have lots of brands, and they seem to move sometimes from distillery to distillery. So today they're known for Heaven Hill, Burnham Original, Rittenhouse Rye, Elijah Craig, Evan Williams, Pikesfield, Larceny Bourbon, Old Fitzgerald, Mellow Corning, lots and lots of others. Now, the broad category of American whiskey is a huge tent. It's a big, big tent with few specific requirements for production under its general term. And by design, the regulations are not overly prescriptive. Now, American whiskey comes in many forms. There's bourbon, the most recognized type of American whiskey, only to be allowed to be produced and called a bourbon in the United States. Of course, you can make a bourbon style whiskey anywhere in the world using the same recipes, but to call it bourbon, label it bourbon, it has to be made in the United States, not just in Kentucky, but anywhere in the United States. Although lots of people still think you can only make bourbon in Kentucky, which is not true. Bourbon came written in American law in the 1960s and became the national drink. I mean, it was tightened up over the years. Just pre-Prohibition, it was starting to tighten up. Same with rye, and then post-Prohibition, tightened up even further and written into statute in the 1960s. Now, specific categories of whiskey have more exacting requirements. So whereas this has very few, it's neither bourbon, rye, or wheat whiskey. What I can tell you about this American whiskey, though, it has followed the bourbon rules right up until and after distilling. But then instead of charred virgin oak casks, used casks have been used, much like the majority of Scotch whiskey. So this is a bourbon, Heaven Hill bourbon mash bill thrown into first fill casks. Really just, I think there was some experimentation going on because most American whiskey, bourbon and rye has to go into virgin oak charred casks. And as soon as you put it in anything else, it becomes not bourbon. So this is a bourbon mash bill put into refill casks, ex-bourbon casks.
And Dave, is that what it would have been, just pure experimentation, do you reckon?
Yeah, I think this was experimentation because there was some challenges, and there has been challenges in the laws going on, and there still is challenges trying to get away from this, you know, because it's very, very limiting to be able to put whiskey only in virgin oak casks. And there have been these experiments going on over the years, and labeled American whiskey in the US is sort of bottom shelf whiskey. It's where it's mixed with industrial grade alcohol, unaged stuff, and it's the rules for American whiskey are really, really sort of loose if you were labeling it over there. Whereas bourbon, you know exactly what's in the bottle in the bourbon, and a rye and a corn whiskey. You know that the mash bill is 100% corn in a corn. In a bourbon, it's minimum 51, and corn, and then there's rye. Same with rye, and same with wheat whiskies. There are rules, whereas American whiskey is a very, very broad spectrum, and it's normally that sort of the industrial. It's like a mixto of tequila, if you know what I mean. Industrial grade alcohol mixed with a bit of whiskey, completely so it's very little value sort of thing in America. But we bought it because it's really interesting. It's a bourbon in used wood, effectively.
It's interesting. Sorry, go on, Simon.
I was just going to say it's certainly like a really elegant American whiskey. You're expecting a bourbon of this age to be much punchier, much more extracted, and I'm just getting lots of like beautiful fresh stone fruit and apricots and peaches, and it's a delicious drop.
It is absolutely. I absolutely love it. It's a cracking whiskey. Now we made a bit of. I'm just going to get the label up here.
It's interesting to see the experiment from the other side, where there's a few like straight bourbons finished in cask now, and they can label that by going it's a bourbon and we've just happened to finish it. So it's interesting to see the experimentation from the start of the process rather than the end.
So we called this batch 1. Really, it should have been a batch 2 or batch 3 because we had a Heaven Hill label, but it's not what we do now. The Heaven Hill label remains the same, and it would be we did the bourbon, the corn, and the American whiskey all as batch 1s, where it should have been batch 1, 2, 3 with the same label with differences on them, effectively, because it is the Heaven Hill label. But there you go. We all it's boutiquey. So yeah, we've just made a play on the massive fire that happened in 1996 with many barrels of whiskey going up in flame and lots of stock disappearing. And they have put these sprinkler systems in their wooden rick houses now. Yeah, it's all stone warehouses. I mean, if you look back in history of many distilleries, there's fires and explosions involved in lots and lots of these distilleries. Yes, it's a huge risk having high proof alcohol sitting around in wooden barrels with the vapors that leak, and people smoking cigarettes and light bulbs. Nowadays it's obviously a lot more safety features in there with sprinklers and with these spark proof lamps that are shielded and everything. But in those days something went wrong. There are sprinklers in there, and that's what we're making a play on our Heaven Hill wooden brick houses with these sprinkler systems in there. On our corn whiskey, we just threw as many corn cobs on the label as possible. With our American whiskey, we just tried to put as many Americanisms scattered over the barrel. So we've got blue jeans, we've got the sort of the college jackets, we've got hamburgers, we've got space shuttles, we've got baseball gloves, we've got cowboy hats, we've got baseballs.
Is that some bald eagle feet as well up the top there?
Oh yes, you have. You did. Yeah, you're right. I've just seen that there. Yeah, I think that's pecan pie down the bottom there, is it?
Sounds like a decent handout for this bottle. Bit of sport, bit of hot dog, bit of dessert. Good weekend out.
Yeah. Mm. One day we'll remember what a weekend out is like.
Aye, that'll be nice.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a really interesting release. I wish there was more of it. I will check all the label and see if there's any been held back. But yeah, I think this is a really interesting release, and I wish we could get some more. I wish people have, as a whiskey geek, it's interesting to see these sort of experiments that distilleries are playing at. It's just like Scotch putting into virgin oak. This is the other way around, isn't it? It's American whiskey. It's like some of the whiskies where they start off in a sherry cask and finish in a bourbon cask. I mean, I tasted one of them recently, which is really interesting.
Right.
But yeah, this is like very elegant, like Simon said earlier, like a very elegant, long-aged bourbon. But they're not allowed to call it bourbon.
Yeah,
it's interesting, that the lead taste there is delicate and subtle, and I really found that. I think 10 minutes I've had this in the glass now, and it's really starting to open up. I think And I think one of the interesting things about tonight's tasting, you've got an Irish 8-year-old, you've got an American 9-year-old, and you're about to go into a German 3 and an English 8-year-old. And we can't do this like we did last week, where we've got all these same whiskies matured for less, in the same country, probably in warehouses that are reasonably similar. The years mean absolutely nothing. And even though we're only going up 1 year in America, it feels like on the nose we're going up a lot more, if you know what I mean. Like, it's a whiskey is quite old, as Simon, you were saying, should be, even without that virgin oak, the sheer climate of where Heaven Hill is. It's a whiskey that's taking a little bit of time to really reveal itself. And then as it does, there's real waves of complexity starting to come through.
Well, I mean, that's where I really like the notes here about the finish, because you are getting a lot of that complexity, and that cask is coming through on the finish, and lots of spice. It's delicious dram, and does get more and more complex.
I think this really does show the distillery character more. Yeah, because we're not being masked by that virgin oak that you get on a normal bourbon, where it's much heavier, darker, vanilla and spice, clove sort of spices that seem to come through heavily from that charred virgin oak. This really does sort of show the distillery character, that new make coming through, that's delicate, as we're saying, on the nose, with those fruity notes coming through.
That's a really interesting point. I'm going to throw that to both of you as just sort of like a supplementary question here. The concept of distillery character in American whiskies. Like you mentioned, Heaven Hill does a bunch of brands. Pretty much everyone does. Like you look at Buffalo Trace, you've got Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare and Weller and all these different things. You look at the Brown-Forman distilleries. You've got Jack Daniels, you've got Woodford Reserve, Old Forester, like all these different things. It's really hard sometimes to actually pick a distillery's actual character, because the casks mature so quick. The mash bills are a little bit different. And it's almost like a cultural character rather than what their spirit actually makes. So that's a really interesting point. Like, as you guys are tasting samples and stuff, can you pick up characters in American distilleries, like some of these bigger ones?
Well, because a lot of the brands, like you say, are made at the same distillery, it's just different mash bills and cut points on columns. I don't think you can. I think you're tasting what the distiller is creating with that mash bill. And then it's heavily masked by the cask. I feel, virgin oak cask is quite an aggressive cask to put in. That's why some of the Scotch whiskies that we bottled at young ages and very, very pale is because we're trying to highlight that distillery character before it's being masked by lots and lots of wood. And I think that's the reason why we bought this, A, because it was at the right price, and B, because it's bloody tasty and something you don't see. It's unusual, which is why it's probably all sold out now.
I mean, I guess we'd start to see more distillery character being shown in some of those smaller American distilleries that we've bottled. So last year we did a rye series, we did a world series. We did we had a Copperworks in there as well. Help me out here, Dave. We had a few different American ryes in there, and those are certainly start to show more distillery character. Rather than these larger concerns that do produce several labels with the same or similar mash bill, and often even with very reputable distilleries, it's simply cask selection which will determine what label it goes into. It's exactly the same mash bill, exactly the same warehouse, just some will be from the top of the warehouse and some will be from down the bottom.
Yep. Yeah, I think one of my favourite sets of whiskies that we bottled from the American distilleries is got to be the Reservoir. We did a real geeky series of Reservoir. The Reservoir distillery is up in Richmond, Virginia, and it's a couple of friends from school went into brewing, went into making whiskey, make everything as they can quite locally. And they do 100% mash bill, so that means enzymes are needed, rather than using malted barley. But they do 100% corn, 100% rye, and 100% wheat whiskies. And these are really geeky. They don't make a bourbon per se, but they bottled a bourbon for us where they used their 300% mash bill sort of thing, matured whiskey, and then blended a batch together for us to call it a bourbon. So it had more than 51% corn, and we released these all at the same time. That you can actually make your own wheat whiskey, your own. You could blend your own. You know, say, well, 51% rye. I'm going to add a bit wheat. You could. Yeah, it's really, really geeky series. That's one of my favorite.
That's awesome.
From one American distillery. If you're a geek and you want to start playing around, so let's make my own bourbon out of this corn. We've got 2-year-old matured corn, wheat, and rye whiskey. Let's play around and blend it by the glass. That was kind of cool.
I've never heard of bourbon being done like that. I know that's big in Canada to mature separately and then blend back after 8, 10, 20 years, whatever. But I've never heard of that. You know, that the bourbon matured 100% mash bills individually. I think it's quite fascinating.
All right. Well, they don't ordinarily do that. Their bourbon is 100% corn whiskey in virgin oak, in virgin oak casks, and they use little small casks. They use long. That's the difference with some of these smaller craft distilleries that we've worked with. Their wood has generally been aged longer than the whiskey that's going into it, so they're air drying the wood. It's literally sat out there in the lumber yards to naturally season.
Yeah.
Quick shout out to Gary down in Tassie there. Says a distillery near him is about to release 100% wheat whiskey, which would be quite fascinating to see how wheat goes in Tasmania. I'm going to hazard a guess, knowing that he is in Tassie, that I can maybe pick one distillery that might be from.
Nice. Yeah. Yes. The wheat whiskies, well, a wheated bourbon and things like Maker's Mark, which is a great guzzling bourbon. The 100% wheat we did from Reservoir was just superb. Absolutely love it.
All right.
So that was what did I say? That was, yeah, we had that over here for £45 a bottle. I'm not sure. I don't think there's anything left. If there is, I'm going to put an order in. I'll look in a minute because I've only got a little tiny bit left.
Right. Whiskey number 3. Slyrs.
Let's head over. I don't know how to pronounce this properly. Slyrs or something like that. It's our first ever batch from this Bavarian distillery, Slyrs. It's a 3-year-old, a release of 691 bottles, and we bottled this at a pretty impressive 52.5% ABV. It's another one of our award-winning whiskies, picking up a gold medal at the Spirits Business World Whiskey Masters. Now, the Slyrs distillery is located... Oh, this is where it's all going to get really messy now with my bad German. Located on the shores of Lake Schliersee in Bavaria, in Germany. I don't know. The only time I've ever been over to Bavaria was to the yacht works over there, Bavaria Yacht Bow, a long, long time ago. Now, this region apparently has Iro-Scottish roots, Slyrs being Gaelic or Gaelic.
That's a nice link into earlier in the series, so there is a connection there. There you go.
There you go. In the year 779, 5 monks from Ireland and Scotland built a monastery in the Bavarian wilderness of Schliersee. They called the monastery Slyrs. Now, obviously, the whiskey story for Slyrs begins a little later from that, with a bet going back to 1994. Following his visits to Scotland, brewer and master distiller Florian Stetter bet his colleagues a crate of wheat beer that first-class whiskey could also be distilled in Upper Bavaria. So yes, it's a big, powerful.
Such a great nose.
Yeah.
Like this is the only one I've tried, and I we've done it in the tasting room back when we could have people in tasting rooms and that sort of thing. And I think you got the same reaction that night with a bunch of people who'd never tried this distillery before. I have tried stuff from Slyrs before this, but nothing that tasted quite like this. I think there was very early releases, but just, I mean, that is a nose that just affirms love about whiskey. You know, it's something that you can sit on. We have time constraints, so I'm going to drink it. But if we didn't, I'd be sitting on this for an hour, just nosing this.
It's a cracking example, I must admit. Well, he came from a brewing family. His family, his parents' Lantern Hammer Distillery, and he distilled his first whiskey way back in 1999. But it wasn't until much later, I think 2007, that they built a proper distillery nearby. Now, production and cask aging all take place at the distillery site, giving that Slyrs a thoroughly regional Upper Bavarian character. It's made with Bavarian barley, and of course, the finest alpine water. And
I should mix it with some of Warragamba Dam's finest.
Yeah,
they malt do their own maltings. It's gently dried, and it gives that sort of aromatic, smoky sort of flavour. I'm not quite sure what they do there with their smoking. I know I was talking to the guys at Swiss Whiskey at Langerton, and they use sort of birchwood smoke to smoke their barley, which gives a different style of smokiness to it. I'm not sure if they're using something local to smoke theirs, sort of wood smoke to put into it. It gives a very, very sort of aromatic smoke coming through that Slyrs malt, very, very malty. Let's have a look at the label. Where is it?
It's got a beautiful. It reminds me, it probably shouldn't surprise me at all, of some of the better young Australian whiskies, some of the better young American whiskies that are coming from brewing cultures, where everything is about the malt, the fermentation, and just getting that right. And then you can worry about the maturation and that sort of thing after. But get your fermentation and your wash, really, really flavorful. That it just reminds me of some of the other ones that I've, sort of enjoyed in the past 5 years as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favourite nosy notes that I get for this, and it's a particularly Kiwi tasty note, is pineapple lumps. Just something I can't separate from this whiskey. Really enjoy it every time I get to try it.
It's a really interesting whiskey. We haven't spoken to them again since this first batch, but hopefully it's something we'll go through with one of our new releases when we're doing a European or an EU or something like that series going forward. They've been making so many great distilleries around the world making some cracking whiskies. Our label, we've gone for the full-on corniness of a great big Oktoberfest, a beer festival in Bavaria, what it's famous for. You can Google Oktoberfest and you will see a picture very similar to like this, where something like a ship has been built in this huge tent, which is what we based our label on. We've got the whiskey maker down there instead of the Bavarian ladies with all the arms of beers that they carry, which is quite impressive, I must admit. We've got the distillery maker, Hans, the head distiller, balancing Glencairns all over his arms, rather like a Bavarian beer lady. And there is one of the guys that used to work for us, used to work for the company Atom a long time ago. Lots of our labels feature people from the business. We put them in every now and again. We hide them in there, or sometimes we make them prominent. So we've got I can't remember his name now. It's been a long time since he's left us, that's for sure. But I think he was responsible for finding this distillery and getting this cask at the time, which is why he's hidden on the label. But yeah, it's all about a big Bavarian beer festival for our label on here. Very colourful.
Yeah.
And our tasting notes. There we go. It's a cracking whiskey. I think it's bigger and bolder than we put in that tasting note. It is. If you want an overall impression, it's a big whiskey for 3 years old, and for 2-row barley. And it's almost like the Paul John that we bottled, which is 6-row barley, is a big, powerful whiskey. This sort of comes across very similar. I think it's down to the beer makers here, I guess, making that really big, punchy, fruity wash.
I certainly agree with the sticky caramel thing, though, and particularly in the back palate.
chocolate digesters for me is really stands out.
Mm. That's
Yeah.
a wee cracker.
And yeah, I know it says the palate here, but I do get like that, just that hint of citrus. I don't know if it's lemongrass or not for me, but there is just that very like sort of subtle citrus that gives it this bit of lift. That is very, very tasty. Yeah, just like I think Dave, you mentioned it when you were describing the distillery in general as being aromatic, but I think out of the first three, certainly the most immediate of the noses. These are, for me, and I assume most of the people drinking along with us, unless they cracked them earlier today or last week, this is the first time they're being opened up. Sometimes they can take a bit. The American one took a little bit for me to get warmed up. This immediately ready to go straight out of the bag.
Yeah, it's a big bold nose.
I highly recommend going back to your Irish single malt at this stage and just seeing how much sherry's jumping out of that glass. So,
if I must,
I've just gone back to the American, and do you get refreshers over there? Those sort of sherbety, fizzy sweets called refreshers. I don't know if they're still made. But sort of getting that really sherbety sort of strawberry note coming off the nose there, that raspberry strawberry note of the sherbety refreshers coming off the American whiskey.
Even sort of getting the berry confectionery on the palate as well. Like amazing what a little bit of oxygen will do.
Yeah. And that's
little whiskey flights.
Yeah, the beauty of these 50 ml bottles as well. You can go back to stuff and do this in the opposite order tomorrow if you wanted to. I actually find for some of my videos, I actually make more sense when you play it backwards as well.
Yeah. Well,
I find mine make much more sense with the sound off.
Yeah.
Depending on how much tasting you're doing, for sure. By the end of the tasting, you're certainly speaking in tongues. Can be.
Yummy. Are you ready for
I think it is just why we maybe did that then is because I have a feeling number 4 it might blow our heads off. So if you did want to actually go and take a little drop and compare and contrast, now might be the time to do it because you may not.
I don't think it's going to blow your heads off. Now, the cask details for that last one was a heavily toasted virgin oak American virgin oak barrel and a second fill American white oak barrel. So one heavily toasted virgin and one second fill ex-bourbon. So it's a vatting of 2 casks.
There you go.
Yeah, the next one is our English whiskey. It is a vatting of 2 casks. It is heavily peated. Some people get the peat first, some people get the fruit first. And it's really interesting taking this out a number of times, how people perceive it. Now, I got all the smoke and the peat first, and my daughter gets all of the fruit first and the smoke comes along. So she sees it in a very, very different light to how I see it. However, I do think it's probably it's been the best English whiskey I've tasted for a long time when this first came out. And I knew immediately this was going to be a gold medal winner. When I tasted the first cask sample, I thought, this is a winner. We just bottled some more English whiskies, and as a separate thing, as a whiskey club, we bottled a 12-year-old not so long ago, and it was absolutely stunning. As a whiskey club, this is nothing to do with boutique. This is a group of friends of ours. They are just making some great whiskies.
So
the English whiskey.
Yeah, like you're obviously going to talk about the English whiskey, but if you're going to do it, I might prompt you to give like a bit of an overview about like the current state of English whiskey being, from the homeland. Like, what is we understand obviously what Australian whiskey is doing with this emerging scene. What does English whiskey feel like at the moment? Is it popular? Are the locals drinking it, or what's going on?
It's growing rapidly. These were the pioneers, the English Whisky Company. I love it how they've taken the name as the English Whisky Company. They wanted to be St. George's, and of course there was already a St. George's Spirits down in California. And so their distillery is called St. George's Distillery. There wasn't anybody making whiskey in England at the time. There was a small cider farm down in Cornwall making. They made some whiskey early on in a very small. It wasn't a whiskey distillery per se. They wanted to make distill their apples to make a Calvados sort of thing, an apple brandy. But they did make some whiskey from malted barley before this distillery was actually put together. The Welsh were on it long before as well. I think Penderyn started in 2000, or the Welsh Whisky Company. So this English Whisky Company, they sort of led the charge. They first built the distillery way back in 2006, and their first spirit ran December 2006. And their first bottling ever, a 3-year-old whiskey, came out in 2009. They are 14 years old this year, 15 years old. They have gone on from strength to strength. I love it that it's a family-owned distillery, that they do whatever they want. So if they want to make a triple distilled, David's allowed to make a triple distilled. If he wants to go, well, let's try some different mash bills and make a single grain whiskey, he's allowed to do that, which is pretty damn cool. Today, there are lots and lots of small distilleries. We've even got our own English Whisky Festival. The first one started last year. We will be working with them this year in September, the second ever English Whisky Festival. It is still virtual. We're not doing it he's not doing it in person this year. And our next series that we're just about to announce next month is a Home Nation series. So it's a mixture of English, Irish, our Home Nations for the Lions tour. Basically, we're just trying to cash in on that. No, we're not trying to cash in. It's mine. It's me. I'm the rugby fan. No one else knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the Home Nations. But yeah, I'm a Home Nations sort of person. Always support the Home Nations, and I thought, this is kind of cool. But there's a lot of English distilleries. Some very, very small in little sheds. Some wood-fired stills. Just passionate people making it for their local area. We've got a few big distilleries. We've got the English Whisky Company, which is quite a big distillery, just one pair of stills. But they have a lot of capacity that they're not utilising at the moment. So it is there. We've got the Cotswolds Distillery up in the Lake District, which have quite a big capacity, and they're starting to produce a fair amount of whiskey. The Lakes Distillery in the Lake District. We've got the Cotswolds, another, quite an impressive capacity in the Cotswolds, and we bottled some of the Cotswolds. The new distilleries, I think one of the ones to look out for is going to be the White Peak. I've tasted their new make spirit is absolutely stunning. I think they're going to be one to watch out for. They're the ones of the sort of the bigger capacity distilleries. There's some new ones in Dartmoor, but most of the others are really quite small and niche. Like Bimbo is really quite small with their direct fired stills, little tiny copper alembics, very, very small. I think I'm living in between three. I think I'm sort of equidistant about three. The Oxford Distillery, some amazing styles of still just down here, and then we've got the Cotswolds up that way, and then Norfolk up there. I'm in the middle of a triangle. Bimber is causing a lot of noise over here, but can I
ask Dave, just on that, like all these things coming through in Australia now, you won't find a whiskey bar that doesn't have Australian whiskey, and it's hard to find a bar worth itself that doesn't have at least one bottle of Australian whiskey, on the shelf somewhere. It might be one Starwood or something like that, but at least one. I haven't been to London obviously for a little while now, but is English whiskey cutting through in the domestic market, or is it being exported? Like, is it in the bars? Who's drinking English whiskey?
It's who's drinking? Good question. It's in the dedicated whiskey bars, that's for sure. I don't think you're seeing it in there'll be pubs local to the distillery that will definitely support their local distillers. You're certainly seeing that with gin. Every bar you go into up and down the country, they will have a local gin, and I'm certainly seeing that around the distilleries. You'll find pubs that are supporting their local distillers with their whiskies. Definitely. Is it sort of taken a mainstream? Not at the moment, but I think it's getting there. I think it's starting to. Yeah, I think it's starting to come, and certainly seeing it in the whiskey bars. I know the whiskey bars in London that we've been working with definitely have our English whiskies in there. That's for sure. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So the St George's, the first distillery. This is first in over 100 years. It's really led. This is a vatting of a Sauternes, hogshead, and a bourbon barrel, and their heavily peated malt is used. It's a great little distillery to visit. It's a big distillery. It's a nice distillery to visit. It's not a big distillery, but it was purposely built. It's a very neat distillery.
Do we know where the peat comes from?
Yeah, they use peated malt from the maltsters up in Aberdeen. So it'd be Highland peat. I don't know where this one came from, because it has got it's quite heavy. I'm not sure whether they can buy it from the commercial malting, so they can specify the peat. Generally, they were using the maltsters up in Aberdeen, which is generally Highland peat that's used over there. We've gone for the typical corn on the label here with St George's, and we've got it's a label that we can't. It's going to be difficult to change much, I must admit, because we're inside the helmet of St George as he's fighting the dragon. It's difficult to put the changes. So that's batch 1 label there, and I'll pop in the batch 2. So yeah, we're inside St George's helmet, so we're just looking through the tiny little window, looking at a bit of the dragon. We've got to see his hand on his sword, and we can see the treasure in the background, which is golden whiskey, not the maiden indeed. It is a treasure chest of whiskey. Our tasting notes. Now this was mine, so I got all the sooty smoke first. You can see the difference there between batch 1 and 2. We've got the little fire. I think that's meant to be like a Werther's original mint on a spit there, so we've got the smoke and the Werther's sort of thing coming through.
Okay.
For the original tasting notes there, but I get all the sooty smoke first, and then that sweet, really sweet, sticky white grapes coming through with a bit of lemon. The fruit comes after for me, but they're really quickly engulfed by those peaty mints, and I'm left with that butterscotch mints, the Werther's originals. Now, when my daughter tastes it, she gets all the fruit first, and the smoke follows, which is. And I've asked this at different shows, and I've seen boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wives, friends having completely different first impressions of this, which is really kind of cool. I've taken this out blind into whiskey club meetings in the past, and people will swear it's Scotch. Scottish people will swear it's Scotch. Oh, it must be an Islay. They're getting all the smoke first. It must be an Islay. And when I tell them, they're just, what? English whiskey? Oh no, what are we doing? We're doomed, that sort of thing. But no, David Fitt, the distiller at the English Whiskey Company, makes amazing new make spirit. You can drink it straight off the still if they'll let you. I would drink it straight off the still. It's just delicious. They're a really sweet spot. Now, I know when they were setting up, David's been there right from the beginning. David Fitt is an ex-brewer from Green King Brewery, which is a big brewing beer brewer in that region of East Anglia. And they were set up to distill. Ian Henderson, ex-Lefroy distiller, was brought out of retirement to help them set up and get the stills running sweetly, basically. So he was there, and he sort of trained David to distill, and it's just gone on from strength to strength. And so now he's allowed to play. So he's done some small batches of triple distilled, where he's just run it through 3 times to see what happens. Some superb stuff there. He's made some great mixed grain which we have to call it, we can call it a single grain basically, but distilled in pot still, so not a mash bill or 100% malted barley. He's put some other grains in there as well. And Norfolk and that sort of East Anglia is sort of the breadbasket for grain growing whiskey. Grain growing, a lot of that grain is going up to the maltsters in Scotland to supply malted barley for the whiskey industry. And that's really the founders of this distillery was a farmer. He grew grain, and most of his grain was being sent to Scotland to make whiskey. And that's why his retirement pipe dream was to, well, why can't we distill, and why isn't anybody distilling in England? And that's where it all started. He never wanted to build a commercial distillery. It was always about, I just want to make enough whiskey for me and my friends. I want a small, it's my retirement project. And at that time, challenging the laws, tax laws, the excise, customs and excise laws, they ended up making a proper distillery, really challenging the laws, and they've led the way basically. And the laws have changed since they put in stills that were at that minimum requirement from very long ago. But the laws have changed, and it's opened up a whole new wave of distilling, much like it happened in Australia when the laws changed there about the size of still and the revenue and the tax and the excise and everything like that with Bill Lark. You could say James Nestrop, who's sadly no longer with us, but he did get to see his distillery built, run, and make a success out of it. It's now run and owned by his son, who built it. He was a builder. Andrew was the builder, had a building company. James was the ex-farmer. So, yeah, a lot of it's all local grain from their local farms, probably even some from family farms still. And they're just making great whiskey. They have no shareholders. And so if they have a good year this year, they make more whiskey. Next year, it's that sort of business. It's been growing organically, and it's got a pretty good following over here, that's for sure.
Mm. You weren't wrong by describing it as one of the better English whiskies you've tried. You've obviously tried a few more than me, but I've tried probably a dozen or a dozen and a half English whiskies in my time, and this has to be right up there. I think part of it is the integration of all the flavors that are there. It's sometimes in these newer distilleries, particularly with peat. I actually tried an Australian whiskey earlier today, which was heavily peated, and the exact same feeling came to me. It's not that smoked wood chips sort of thing. It's not that fence post on fire, trying to assault everyone. Everything's really well integrated here, and I have to say I got the sootiness first. I did get that ashiness. I got the smoke, and then the fruit came through for me. But just a exceptionally well put together whiskey. There's no bits out of whack. There's no sharp edges. There's nothing. Technically, it's perfect. And then you get into the complexity and the flavors after that.
Yeah, it's a superb batch, and we haven't got any, sadly. But we are great friends with this distillery, and we have got some English whiskies coming up again from this distillery. We've got another heavily peated one in the cask that we should be bottling shortly, and we've got another one ready to come out next month. I think we've got a 12-year-old coming out next month, haven't we, Simon? It's a 12-year-old. That's just ex-bourbon casks, and they were shipping in first fill bourbon casks from, I can't remember the name of the distillery, probably Heaven Hill or Buffalo Trace. I can't remember, maybe Buffalo Trace. But yeah, they haven't got a cooper, and so they ship the casks in whole, and they're just going from strength to strength, just growing organically. And having been distilling since 2006, they've got some aged stock lying around now. It's starting to get long age. But they were starting off, it was just 3-year-old whiskies, and it was then going around to 6. They didn't have a lot of, they never put age statements on for a long time, that's for sure. They did their chapters, and they've taken away their chapters now, and they're just having their standard sort of and smoky But they're doing these small batches. They did release an 11-year-old a little while ago, and I think I've seen a few indies with age. I know we've had a couple of, say the 5-year-old was our first batch, the 8-year-old our second. I think the third batch is going to be a 12-year-old, and we've got another cask, but they're great. There's some great English whiskey coming through, certainly from the bigger players. English whiskey, Cotswolds, Lakes, and going forward, definitely the capacity that this White Peak distillery has, it's going to be able to make whiskey. I know they've been laying down casks for a few years now. They're about to release their first ever 3-year-old whiskey, and certainly going by the new make spirit and the young malt that I've tasted, it's been superb. Yeah, very impressive. As has the Bimber. The Bimber's been very impressive as well. Lots of people.
Not to
the Bimbers here.
Not to give too much away, but you can't see it, but I can see it. But they're directly in front, about give or take 4 meters away from me. There's 4 boxes full of Bimber, and 4 boxes full of very different Bimbers of all shapes and sizes, which might give an insight into something coming up.
Okay.
How very exciting.
Yeah.
I sneakily poured myself a little bit of the Irish back there just to see it. The English hasn't killed it at all. And it's just getting more and more lush, that Irish. That fruit, that really polished fruit is really jumping out. But I think a really eccentric collection of whiskies tonight, but nothing, really that clashes with the others. I think, often it's really hard to place American whiskey into a lineup of non-Americans. You can put Germans and Irish and Scotch and Australians and Japanese together. You chuck one American in there and it throws the curve completely. But that one being in used and refill barrels didn't as well. So it's been quite fascinating to go through all these and finding it very hard to pick a favourite or a winner because they are all so disparate.
All very, very interesting drams. I mean, look, I think for me that the English whiskey is taking it for me at the end. Just that beautiful balance, that citric quality it's got in there as well, just really balances that peat. Just great dram.
I think
if I had to pick a favourite, or I'm just going to drink them all anyway. But
yeah, exactly.
Sadly, there is no American whiskey. I just checked. There is no American whiskey anywhere, which is a real shame because I think it's spectacular. I'm hoping we'll be able to find some more.
Coming back to an American, I just got some violets off there as well. Those violet pastilles I wasn't really expecting. It was in a good way. Very good.
I have to say, though, gun to my head, the Slyrs, I think it's a very meat whiskey. For whatever reason, it's got that really aromatic nose, that big, bold sort of thing. I think in about 2 hours' time, I might lean towards the Irish, but right now, gun to the head, it's the Slyrs.
Yeah, there's nothing available for that in export. We've got a couple of bottles at Master of Malt.
We do have a couple of bottles of Slyrs, I think, still in Australia.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll have a look for you.
Yeah, we've only got a couple in the UK. There's nothing available export wise. I know the English has gone for a long time. I found a bottle not so long ago up in Birmingham. And I know the American whiskey's all gone, which is a sad state of affairs.
That's all right. I learned very early on in my whiskey journey that the art of loving whiskey is the art of letting things go. There's always going to be something new. There's going to be something new and exciting. And before we went live, Simon was saying maybe there's some hints about what's coming next, which you definitely can't tell us about, Dave. But now that we're live, I'm definitely going to ask the question. So what's coming up from Boutique?
Well, so our Home Nations series is definitely coming up next month. It's an impressive collection of whiskies from England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. I say it's mostly English because I picked the team. No, I mean, I'd love to have more Welsh distilleries, but there isn't many Welsh distilleries. I would love to have more Welsh whiskies. There's two more now making whiskey, but we've only got some Penderyn, the oldest outside of Scotland, I would say. Certainly of the mainland sort of thing. They started making it 2000 whiskey journey, a few years ahead of England. Yeah, that is looking good. We've got a few English whiskey distilleries with new labels on, which is really kind of cool. Obviously, we have the English Whiskey Company, and we bottled Cotswolds, so there's Cotswolds in an English, a New English, and a few new distilleries. And White Peak will definitely be in there because it's one I fell in love with at last year's English Whiskey Festival. I said, we've got to have some of this. I've tasted a few other new English whiskey distilleries, and they're not making whiskey. They haven't got whiskey yet, but their new make spirit is absolutely impressive, and I'm hoping we'll be able to. I'm making friends with English whiskey distilleries, so hopefully we'll have a proper English series one day to rival the Australian series that we've just successfully rattled through a few months ago. I'm hoping we'll have an English series to rival the Australian series that we had. A completely English series.
Well, then, it just there was a suggestion in the chat earlier that maybe we need a Lions versus Australian whiskey night, which I'm all for, but the Lions aren't playing Australia in this tour, so I think more likely is an Ashes night, which is an English versus Australia.
Yes.
We could get, I reckon, maybe 5 from each side, 5, distillers and people from the industry from either side, and just go absolutely at it. Obviously, at 7:00 Australian time, so we're at the advantage, the home ground advantage. I reckon that could be a bit of fun.
An actual series whiskey tasting with the English versus Australian. That would be a lot of fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you again, Dave. I know you don't take any joy in getting up and drinking whiskey with us on the other side of the world at 10 a.m. in the morning, particularly when you can now be outside in that beautiful sunshine. But really do appreciate you joining us again. And Simon could be walking around the beach with a margarita in a mug, but sitting outside drinking whiskey with us instead. It's always a great pleasure. And thank you, of course, everyone who's been watching, jumping in and out of the stream throughout tonight across the various channels that everyone's on. Because we can't let you exit through the gift shop and give you some discounts tonight, as usual, for 24 hours, free shipping Australia-wide on anything boutique-y. There's some cool stuff in there, some stuff we've tried, some stuff we haven't tried. There's obviously heaps of Scotch. There's a couple of Australian ones left. 20-year-old Juras. There's a 21-year-old Japanese in there as well. There's the other Irish single malt. There's some rum, there's gins, there's all sorts of stuff. But thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again. But most importantly, guys, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, always a pleasure being able to taste through these again. Lovely to see you, and thanks for joining us. If anyone joined us this evening, this morning, I'm going to go have my breakfast.
And on that note, we will see you all at the next one. There's no immediate things from boutique or virtual otherwise that we've announced, but that's because we've got some big stuff coming that will all be in a bit of a kablamo, which something I hinted at before might be part of. So we're working on that, and we'll be in touch soon. But boutique will be part of that as well. They may not know it yet, but they're definitely going to be part of it.
We're up for it. We can tell you that much. We'll be keen.
Hi.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.